For today's lesson, our focus standard comes from grade 7, Statistics and Probability, Standard 5. Understand that the probability of a chance event is a number between 0 and 1 that expresses the likelihood of the event occurring. Our topic today comes from our probability unit, Finding Theoretical Probability. Our essential question is, how do we set up the ratios to calculate the probability of given events? So take a moment, pausing the video if you need to copy down the topic, essential question, and today's date in the header, set up your question column and your note column, and resume the video when you're ready to begin. So as the title suggests, we're going to be talking about theoretical probability and how to find it. So theoretical probability, just to give you a little indicator here, is still finding the chance or the likelihood that something is, like we talked about in our last video. And theoretical means it's what we think is going to happen, what we predict the chance or the likelihood is of a certain thing to happen. So we're going to add a little more mathematics to it today. We're talking in our essential questions about how to set up the ratios. Ratios are just a fancy word for fraction. And so you'll see this on Khan Academy and throughout your mathematical career that this is the common setup for that ratio. So we write the word probability. Sometimes as you get into algebra, we just write P. So we say the probability, and then in parentheses we put the given event that we're talking about, like a coin toss or the sports team we're talking about. And then we set up a fraction. And in the numerator, we put the number of times the given event, that matches here, can happen. And in the denominator, we put the total possible of outcomes. So that may not make complete sense right now, and that's okay. It's the first time you're seeing it. But make sure you copy this down, as we're going to use this format for the 3 questions we're going to talk about in this video lesson. So we're going to use this type of ratio, the probability of a given event set up as a fraction, where the number of times the given event can happen over the total possible outcomes. And if you remember back to our last video on expressing the likelihood, probability as a likelihood, we remembered that we can use fractions, also known as ratios, decimals, or percents. And we're going to use all 3 of those today. Here's a look at our first question. A flipped coin landing heads up. So coin tosses are a common example that we use in teaching probability. I have a little picture here of someone flipping a coin, and we're wondering, what is the probability, we know it can be heads or tails, that it will land heads up? So think about that. On a coin, how many sides are heads? How many sides are there on a coin? So here we have it in our hint. Only one side is heads out of 2 possible sides on a coin. So here's that format again. The question said the probability of a coin landing heads up. So we wrote probability, what we want, the given event that we're looking for is the times it's going to land heads, so heads is in the parentheses, is equal to, and now I want to set up a fraction. How many times can it be heads is going to be in the numerator out of the total possible outcomes in the denominator. And I actually wrote a ratio in word form here, so let's translate that to a fraction. If only one side is heads, 1 is going to be in my numerator out of 2 possible sides. There's 2 possible outcomes, heads and tails. So 2 goes in the denominator. So the probability of a coin landing heads is 1/2 as a fraction. What is that as a decimal in percent? Can you complete this equation? I have equal to, what's the decimal and what's the percent? Let's see if we agree. I have 1/2 as being equal to 0 and 50 hundredths as a decimal, and as 50% as a percentage. Is that what you got? Good job. So, that was our first question. Let's try another one. This time, let's talk about a spinner. Spinning the spinner and landing on a green. So we want to find the probability of spinning this particular spinner and landing on a green space. Notice, an important thing to notice here is there's 3 sections and they are all equivalent. This is a fair spinner. We have a red section, a yellow section, and a purple section. Will the spinner land on a green space? Look at our hint here. You're probably already realizing it. There's no green section out of 3 possible sections. So again, we want to set up our probability the correct way of writing our answers. So the probability of landing on a green was the given event from the question. So the probability of landing on a green is equal to, how would we write that as a fraction? If there's no green section out of 3 possible sections. Do you see any ideas from our last question? Well, if you were thinking 0 out of 3, I would agree with you. There is no chance on this spinner of landing on a green out of 3 sections. What is that probability going to be if we express it as a decimal or a percent? We've expressed it as a fraction. What is it as a decimal or a percent? Well, 0 out of 3 is the same as saying 0, which is the same as saying 0%. So we could use the fraction, decimal, or percent form to answer our question. Let's do one last one. Here's our final question. On rolling a fair dice, well, die, because there's only one of them, what is the probability of rolling a factor of 6 on a 6-sided die? We have to remember what the word factor means. Factors are numbers that you can multiply together to get 6. So on this dice, out of 6 sides, 1, 2, 3, and 6 are all factors of 6, because 1 times 6 is 6, and 2 times 3 is 6. So this time I wrote the hint out of a question. Let's see if you can answer it. So pause the video if you need to, copy this down, write out your answer. What is the probability of rolling a factor of 6? Let's see if we agree. Well, I noticed that 1, 2, 3, and 6 are all factors, so that's 4 factors. And there's 6 sides, so 4 out of 6. Well, wait a minute. In dealing with fractions, and in 6th grade I know you dealt with fractions, what can we do to make this a better fraction? And simplify it. So what is 4/6 if we simplify that fraction? Well, 4 and 6 are both divided by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So the simplified form of this fraction 4/6 is 2/3. So I've highlighted it because when we're dealing with probability and we're writing it in our fraction form, we want to use the most simple form of the fraction. And 2/3 is the most simple form of the fraction. So the probability of rolling a factor of 6 is 2/3 as a fraction. What is it as a decimal in percent? 2/3 is 0 and 6 repeating, but we're going to round it to the 2 decimal places. So we're going to write as 0 and 67 hundredths. And we're going to use this decimal to create our percentage. 0 and 67 hundredths is 67%. Alright, so that's going to conclude our second video here in this probability unit on theoretical probability. Please take a moment to make sure that your notes are complete and come ready to class to do more calculating and finding of theoretical probabilities.